Just how brave was the woman who reached for the hem of Jesus' garment? Find out in week 7 of Jesus Christ and Women in the New Testament, the woman with the issue of blood. So we're going to talk about the woman with the issue of blood, and this is week 7 in the series. So in case, I just want to give this warning in case you're watching this video and there's someone around you that's of young age, and we are going to talk about some topics that you might not be comfortable with young children hearing. We're going to be discussing bodily fluids and the discharge of those fluids. So just a heads up, you know your kids best and know maybe if this is something you don't want them to quite hear yet. Okay, so have you ever wondered, why is it that we have bodily fluids? Why are they even in our bodies? Well, life is precious, as we know, and God created us to have bodily fluids inside of our bodies, and that's so that we can produce life. So when you look at the law of Moses, there's many rules concerning bodily fluids to help teach the children of Israel about the preciousness of life and why we should, value it. And just so you know, I'm in no way trying to make this an exhaustive description of what these laws are. I'm just hitting the tip of the iceberg. There's many laws regarding the bodily fluids and the loss of those fluids. So this is just to kind of give you a little snapshot of what is in the law of Moses. So there's a lot of laws surrounding the discharge of bodily fluids. So one thing I see it as is when a bodily fluid, which is life producing, is lost, it's like this, you've lost this ability to produce life. And so as a result, this person is now ritually unclean. Now, we'll talk about this in a minute, but don't think of this as like it means you've done anything wrong or you're bad, or it's nothing like that. So if a man has an emission, this means that they are now unclean until sunset of that day. If the emission occurs during intercourse, then both the man and the woman are unclean until sunset. If the man has some abnormal leakages or some discharges that's just not part of a normal bodily function, then they will be unclean for 7 days after the discharge has stopped. A woman, when she's menstruating, is going to be unclean for 7 days after the menstruation cycle has ended. When a woman gives birth, she's unclean for 7 days if she has a boy, and 14 days if she has a girl. And then there's also purification days associated with childbirth, and those days are doubled if you have a girl. When a woman is bleeding abnormally, then she continues to be ritually unclean for 7 days after the bleeding has stopped. Okay, so with these loss of bodily fluids, you're now ritually unclean. How do you fix it? How do you become clean again? So you have to wash yourself with water, but it can't just be any water. It needs to be living water. And we've talked in the past about living water and what that is. Interestingly, I think, is that women don't need to do this after their menstruation cycle. But if there's been an abnormal loss, like a bodily fluid due to something not normal with the body, then there's also a sacrifice that's in conjunction with the ritual cleaning with the living water. Okay, what does it mean to be ritually unclean? I think if I were to go up to somebody on the street and say, "You're unclean," that would be like an insult. There'd be like, "What? I don't smell. What are you talking about?" So it doesn't mean you're evil. It doesn't mean you're bad. Being unclean was seen as kind of just a normal part of life. It just kind of came with, being human and having bodily fluids. So if a person is ritually unclean, then so is anything they touch. So the bed, the food, the clothing. So women, when they're menstruating, would not be able to prepare a meal for the family. It would make the whole family unclean. or, they would sleep in separate quarters or whatever. And I always think, wait, if I'm on my period, I don't have to do any, I don't have to cook and clean for my family. Sign me up. But anyway, I'm just being funny. So, now this also means that anyone who's ritually unclean can't participate in the temple because they're not considered pure or clean for temple worship. Okay, so let's go a little deeper, dive into the woman with the issue of blood. What's going on with her? So, based on what we know in the scriptures, it sounds like she was in a perpetual state of being unclean because the bleeding isn't ceasing. She's continuing to bleed. So this means she can't participate in the temple. This means anything she touches is also ritually unclean. And if other people know about her condition, which probably most likely would have been true, then she probably has been living a life of isolation and even being shunned. At the time, people saw that if you had an illness or, if you had something with your body that didn't work right, it was seen as you're being cursed by God, or God doesn't have favor towards you, you've done something wrong, or your parents maybe have done something wrong to bring it upon you. We also know she was living in poverty because all of the money that she had spent on doctors seeking a cure. So let's look at, in this story, what she does. In Luke chapter 8, verse 44, it says she came behind him and touched the border of his garment. Now, the Greek word that's being used here means it's this appendage hanging down from the edge of like a mantle, like a piece of cloth or a cloak or something of twisted wool. So essentially think of it as like tassels or little tufts that are hanging down from the garment. Now, these were meant to remind them of the law. So today, this is something that is still practiced, and it's called a tallit. And I actually have one from Israel, and it looks very similar to the one that you see in the picture here. And it is made according to the law of Moses. And as you can see, it's got some fringe that would have been most likely similar to what Jesus would have had wearing this same type of garment. Now, at the corner of each of the tallit, there is this, which is known as a tzitzit, and you probably can't tell by the camera, but you see that there's all these strings, but up above they're knotted together. So these knots number 613 to remind the people of the 613 laws or commandments in the law of Moses. So I love this picture because we're seeing probably a little more closely what this actually would have looked like at the moment. I'm not confident Jesus would have had a garment completely made of blue. Blue was a very expensive dye. As an itinerant rabbi, he didn't make a lot of money, so that would be a hugely extravagant, but it makes for a beautiful picture and it really brings out the blue. So I'm not too upset about it, but I love how she's reaching for that tzitzit. She's reaching for those knots. Now, I don't know what's on this woman's mind exactly. I don't know what she's thinking. She's trying to touch. What was she grabbing for? What was she grabbing for the tzitzit? Was she just grabbing to touch Jesus in some way? But I love how it's a symbol of something so beautiful. Because when we think of the laws or the commandments of God and the protection and the covenant that God makes with his people, it's like that's what she's reaching for. She's reaching for those promises that God has made. But it's beyond the covenant. It's beyond the commandment. That's not what saves us. It's God who saves us. It's God who heals us. And so it's through those covenants, it's through those commandments that she's actually reaching out to God and being healed through Jesus Christ. So let's look at what Jesus is doing in this story. So just as a reminder for some context, he's in Capernaum. The Jairus, the big elder, the important, respected elder, has asked him to heal his daughter who's sick. And that was a big deal to ask an itinerant rabbi to heal your daughter when you're the big powerful spiritual leader in town. So this is drawing attention. This is drawing a crowd. So there's this huge crowd walking with Jesus and Jairus as they're going to Jairus's home. And this woman, it's in this moment that this woman is reaching out to touch Jesus. And he says, somebody hath touched me, for I perceive that virtue is gone out of me. And I think the disciples are like, lots of people are touching you. What do you mean someone has touched you? You're in a huge crowd. But I love how Jesus is so perceptive that he's able to feel that someone, through their faith, has touched, and he can feel that power. He can feel that virtue leaving because of this woman's action. And then she's instantly healed, but yet he still stops. He could have kept going. It's like, oh, someone touched me and got healed. Great, I've got an errand to run. I'm headed somewhere else. But even after she's healed, he still stops to talk to her. Now, keep in mind, technically, she's still unclean for 7 more days, even though she has stopped bleeding. But he still comes to her and talks to her. And what does he call her? Daughter. Imagine hearing that word when for 12 years you've probably been isolated, shunned. No one has wanted to be around you. And he says, you are a member of this family. You belong to all of us. You are a daughter. Be of good comfort. Thy faith hath made thee whole. Go in peace. And I just think how beautiful it is that he's not just saying, oh, you've been healed because I'm so great. Look at how wonderful I am. I healed you just by you merely touching me. But he's pointing out to her, you did this. Your faith, your actions is what brought the healing to you. And now you can go in peace. And it's almost like he's not so much concerned about her physical well-being, but her spiritual well-being. You can be comforted. I love how Jesus really cares about the mental health and the spiritual health of the people, not just the physical, temporal health. So, just to kind of sum up, Jesus was perceptive to his surroundings. He didn't seem bothered or upset that by touching him, she has made him ritually unclean. We see this over and over again. We don't see Jesus getting worked up by these laws and rules that the Pharisees are, so upset about. We see him taking the time to comfort, even though there's a young girl who, unbeknownst to Jairus, is dying or has died, but is acutely sick. He stops to comfort a woman who's been sick for 12 years, a very long time. She's had a chronic condition, not an acute condition, and yet he still stops to make sure she is comforted and make sure that she knows she's a part of the family and is not an outcast. So, in our attempt to be like Jesus, and how can we be like Jesus in this story? I think of 2 things that Jesus does that we ourselves can strive to be like. And first is, how can we be like Jesus and become more aware of those around us? So even among the busy streets of Capernaum in our life, how can we sense or perceive that there's someone who needs us, someone who needs our help? And how can we recognize faith that other people have, particularly those who don't look faithful or maybe don't appear to be someone who is of faith? How can we still see the faith that they have? Well, I hope you liked this video. If you haven't already, jump over to timesoffaith.com where you'll find lots of more information, and you can also join the Facebook discussion group where everyone can talk about what they're currently studying and learning. And you can also follow me on Instagram, and I have a monthly newsletter where I'll share tips, tools, and whatever research I'm currently working on. All the links for this is in the description below. And be sure to subscribe, hit that notification bell, and then you'll be the first to know the next time a video comes out.